Hello everyone, so today I'm going to be showing you how to host your own Restream server with Nginx. So if you want to duplicate your stream to multiple outputs, for example, if you're streaming to both Twitch and YouTube at the same time, then you'll need something called a Restream server. Now there are some services that offer this, like Restream.io is one of them, but I think all of these services are really ripoffs because they're charging you way too much money for something that you can easily set up yourself in probably less than 10 minutes. So that's what I'm going to be showing in this video. And to get started, you'll need a server. Now this can either be a local server, right? Something in your home network or even on your own computer, or it can be a server in the cloud, which is what I'm using today. So I have this server by BuyVM, which gives me unmetered bandwidth, and it's running Ubuntu Linux. So this is all possible to set up on a Windows machine, but I wouldn't really recommend it because it's going to take a lot of tweaking and messing around to get things working. So it's just way easier to do this on a Linux machine. So the first thing we're going to do is install Nginx and this libnginx mod RTMP package. And what that does is it gives us RTMP support for Nginx, which is the streaming protocol that we're going to be using. So once that's done, we're going to open up etc nginx nginx.conf, and I'm going to open it using Vim, but you can definitely use something like Nano if you're not familiar with Vim and how to use it. And by default, it'll look like this. So just go down here below the HTTP block and add a new block called RTMP. And then inside of that, add a server block. And then we're going to say listen 1935. And this is going to listen on port 1935, which is the default port for RTMP. Then we're going to set our chunk size. And now we're going to make a new application block. I'm going to call it live. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but you do need to remember what you called it because it will matter later on when setting up the actual streaming software. So you want to enable streaming here by saying live on. And the RTMP module does actually have support for recording the stream, but I don't plan on using it, so I'll set record to off. And then this is the most important part, is to say push, and then the URL of the stream. So I'm going to go here into my dashboard, and you can see here it says stream URL. I'm going to copy that, and then paste it here, but then I'll put a slash, and then take the stream key and copy it, and then paste it after the slash, okay? Now, for this video, this is going to be basically, I'm only going to be streaming to YouTube, so this is going to be my only output. But let's say I was streaming to, say, Twitch as well. All I would have to do is go down, say push again, and then just put in the URL in the same way that I did just now. And you can have as many of these push statements as you wish, okay? So once that's done, all we have to do is just close all of these brackets and then restart the Nginx service. And if you get any errors, you probably messed up the configuration, so just go back in and check that everything's right. So now that everything's set up, we can just go into the streaming software. I'm using OBS, so I'll go into OBS, and then I'll go up here to File, Settings, Stream, and this is where we actually need to configure our streaming settings. So by default, this will probably be set to something like Twitch, but you want to set it to custom. And then for the server, put in RTMP : / and then the actual IP of your server. This can be a local IP as well. And then do /, and for me this is live. This is the name of that application block from earlier. And for the stream key, right now, it doesn't actually matter what you put here. You can leave that blank, okay? So I'm going to hit OK, click on Start Streaming, and this is going to take a little bit, but you can see we're actually connected. And if I just move this over and look at the page, you can see we're live on YouTube. Now, there is a problem with this, and that is that anybody that knows this URL can now use our restreaming server. And that's obviously not what we want because it's not very secure. But here's what we can do. We can configure a stream key. So the way we do that is, I'll go back into the configuration file, and the RTMP module supports an option called onPublish. Now, if you're not really familiar with HTTP and how the protocol works, this is going to be a little bit confusing, but basically it'll make a request to this endpoint with all the information passed in by the client, and if it returns a 200 response, then it means it's okay to go, and it'll start the restream, and if it returns a 400 response, like 403 forbidden, then it'll actually abort the stream, and it won't continue. So to do a little demonstration, I'm going to set this to localhost on port, say 8000 on /auth. Okay. And when I restart Nginx, now every time I try to start streaming, it'll first go through that endpoint and make an HTTP request. And I can actually show this in real time if I use something like netcat. So I'll just listen on port 8000 here. And when I click on, okay, actually before I do this, I'm going to set my stream key here. I'll use something very simple like 123. Okay. And when I click on Start Streaming, you can see that an HTTP request was made on /auth, and its content type is URL encoded. So this is a POST request where the form body actually contains all of this information, and since it didn't return any kind of response, this is obviously going to fail to connect. But you can see here under this name parameter, this is where the actual stream key is being passed in. So what we can do is just write a simple HTTP service that checks our stream key and then returns a response based on whether or not that stream key is correct. So I'm just going to install Python and the Flask library, which turns out I already have it installed. And now let's make a new file. I'll call it off.py. And in here we can write a very simple script. Okay, so I'll do from Flask import Flask request and response. This is pretty much all I need. And then I'll put the stream key in this variable called secret. Okay. Obviously, this isn't a very secure key. You would want to use something much better than this. You could generate it randomly, for instance. Anyway, I'm going to initialize the app and then make a new route on, say, /auth. And I want it to accept only POST requests. Now let's define a function. And in this function, we want to first get the key. So we'll do key equals request dot form dot toDict dot get name, since the key is actually in that name parameter, as you saw earlier. And I'll do if key is equal to secret. Then we want to return a 200 OK response. Otherwise, we want to return an error response. I'll do 403, which means forbidden. And then I'll just do if name is equal to main. Then run the app. So we do app.run, and I'll set the port to 8000 for this example. Okay, and now I can just run this script using Python. And obviously you'd run this as a service, and you probably wouldn't use the built-in development server. You'd use something like gUnicorn, but for the sake of the tutorial, I'm not going to mess around with that right now because this isn't a Python tutorial. But now I'll go here and I'll provide an incorrect stream key just to use as an example. So I'll do 1234. And when I click on Start Streaming, it'll try to connect, but you can see it gives me an error. And when I look in the server logs, you can see it returned a 403 response because my key was incorrect. But now I'll go into the settings and I'll go to Stream, and then I will provide a correct key this time. And now, when I try to connect, you can see we don't get an error and we're actually connected. And if we check the logs, it's returning a 200 response, which means everything is working, and in a few seconds, we'll be live on YouTube again. With that said, I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing for more videos like this in the future, and I'll see you in the next one.